Okay, welcome back. This is our third video out of 4 on Chapter 27, the Cold War. The last two have been pretty long. I think these next two will be a little shorter. So we left off with Dr. Spock's SANE ad and the Dr. Spock is Worried, published by SANE in 1962. We're going to move on now to the second Red Scare. So this is Truman's loyalty program. So during the Truman containment policy era, there was new threats that rose about communist supporters in America itself. And after finding classified documents in a pro-communist magazine office, Truman is pushed to create a temporary commission of employee loyalty. In 1947, Truman approves the federal employee loyalty program, who could bring suspected employees to the loyalty review board, and as the board gained more power, as more threats were introduced and more suspicion was introduced about employees, it gained the ability to dismiss and attack people disregarding their rights to due process. So the Congressional Loyalty Program in 1944 and 1940, the Smith Act, made it illegal to teach the forcible overthrow of the American government. In the 1950 McCarran Internal Security Act mandated that the Communist Party members register with the government, and it also made it illegal to conspire about the establishing of a totalitarian dictatorship in America. So you can see the federal government's really trying to crack down on communist threats in America. And to the right, you see a propaganda poster, "Is This Tomorrow?" showing an America in flames and people against each other, showing like this is what America would look like under communism. And it really shows the fear of communism at that time. So continuing this Red Scare, the House Un-American Activities Committee performed investigations on potential communists. In 1947, the HOAC investigated Hollywood and imprisoned many actors. The actors refused to testify to HOAC, and so they just simply imprisoned them. In 1950, Alger Hiss, an ex-member of the Agricultural Department, was imprisoned for 4 years because of his connections with the Communist Party. In 1950, Joseph McCarthy, a Senate representative from Wisconsin, began his anti-communist crusade to mobilize the Republican Party. And so McCarthyism and McCarthy is a very famous staple from the Second Red Scare, and you'll see it brought up in a lot of places. So in order to, revitalize the Republican Party, he attacked Democratic congressional and administration members. So below is a listing of a few: Millard Tydings, who is a congressional Democrat; Dina Axson, who is the Democratic member of the State Department; and an unusual one, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were a normal American family, but they were sentenced to death after they were trialed under court, and they were found to have shared atomic secrets to the Soviets. So you can see, even though they were kind of afraid, and at this point we might look back at them and be like, the Second Red Scare was overblown, there were some spies and some secrets that were leaked because American people were given to the Soviets. So continue with this McCarthyism. In 1953, McCarthy and his committee investigated the Army, and the Army saw this as going a little too far, and so they brought this problem up with the Senate. And the Senate agreed to hear the complaint against the Army and McCarthy, and this one debate and one hearing was actually broadcasted, which was different from the rest of McCarthy's, attacks on people. And so the whole American people, they were able to see McCarthy's destructive and irresponsible manner when he attacked his victims. And so this kind of destroyed his reputation, and he kind of fell out of the spotlight. So the casualties of fear. From 1940 to 1950, American rights to due process were usurped by the Red Scare. New York subway workers were dismissed for refusing to answer investigators. The Navajos were denied governmental service because their way of living was deemed communistic. Homosexuals were branded for being easily blackmailable and a threat to national security. And the Red Scare was also used against racism against African Americans. Actor Paul Robinson was denied roles, and W.E.B. Du Bois actually faced violent attacks and had his passport revoked. He was also a confirmed member of the Communist Party. The Congress of industrial organizations disbanded more than 11 unions for alleged communist relations. So we see now a new president and some new movements and actions against communism. So John F. Kennedy is elected, and he is involved in this Bay of Pigs fiasco. So in 1959, Fidel Castro, he gained support of Cuba, and he began a radical regime leaning towards the USSR. And as discussed before, America cut its support from Cuba. In 1960, John Kennedy was elected as president, and he learns about a secret insurrection supported by America to influence a revolution in Cuba. So again, imperialism at its best. In 1961, the invaders storm the Cuban Bay of Pigs and are immediately stopped, and America is forced to answer for attempting to invade and alter a foreign country. So they're actually caught for their imperialism, and it's kind of an embarrassment for Kennedy. It blows up in his face. So Cuba looks more to the USSR for defense and support against American invasions. And this is where we come up to the Cuban Missile face-off. In 1962, American air intelligence snapped photos, as you can see on the right, of missile bases in Cuba, and the U.S. government asserts that these bases are offensive missiles being established by the USSR, which is a threat because Cuba is in range of America, and Russia could easily fire off ICBMs from Cuba and hit America. So Kennedy goes on television and relays his intentions to create a naval quarantine around Cuba to stop Russian imports. As Russian ships approached this blockade, tensions grew immensely. Finally, Khrushchev telegrams two messages to the U.S. He pledges to remove support and missiles from Cuba if U.S. removes its missiles from Turkey. And the Cuban Missile Crisis ends with this agreement. The missiles are removed from both countries. In addition, the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963 prohibits atmospheric testing, though the arms race still continues. So after Kennedy's assassination, there was new confrontation and containment under Johnson. In 1963, Kennedy is assassinated, Johnson takes office, and he promises to be hard on communism like the past presidents. He believes in a domino theory, where one country falls to communism and its neighboring countries will be weakened and follow suit. So this idea of like one domino falling and the rest in the line will follow, it's used in Vietnam and it's used in many other places as well when talking about U.S. involvement in communist nations. In 1965, Johnson approves troops in the Dominican Republic to crush a communist insurrection, so-called communist insurrection. However, the insurrection was actually the previous Dominican Republic president who had been overthrown. So there was an incorrect use of domino theory, and it was, a bad act by Johnson. So we're going to be analyzing some artwork, political cartoons at the time. So the first one is by Edmund S. Veltman. It was published in the Hartford Times in 1962, and it shows how Fidel Castro and Khrushchev are kind of, feeling bad, or not feeling bad, but they're feeling like they failed, and Khrushchev is taking the missiles out of Castro's teeth. And it shows how Khrushchev and Castro failed in their plan to plant missiles in Cuba, but it also shows how Khrushchev, who's saying, this hurts me more than it hurts you, it really hurt Khrushchev's integrity and popularity as well in Russia. And it shows the majority of American sentiment that Khrushchev and Cuba and Castro were an evil force and they were against the democracy and American ideals. The next one we're going to look at is a little less representative of the majority of Americans. So Herbert Bloch made this cartoon in the Washington Post in 1962. As you can see, it shows both Kennedy and Khrushchev working together to close nuclear war. And Kennedy saying, let's get a lock for this thing. And so this shows a surprising impartial view, calling for both Kennedy and Khrushchev to end the issue of nuclear war, which wasn't very, it wasn't a big view at the time. Many saw that Khrushchev was escalating it in America, and in Russia, people thought that Kennedy was escalating it too much as well. So a cartoon trying to ask for agreement between the two presidents shows an impartial view that does actually exist at the time.